Welcome, everyone. It is a special delight to introduce our guest today, as she's one of my dearest friends. Brooke Kuhnhusen is a deeply creative soul who embraces explorations of connection and healing across varied landscapes, ranging from academic classrooms to treeside in a forest. Brooke values creativity and collaboration as portals for transformation and imagination, so vitally needed for new ways of being together and caring for the earth in our time of climate change. She's a psychologist who practices depth and relational therapy in her private practice and also trains and consults with other therapists, teaching in various graduate programs and therapy institutes. Brooke's climate justice advocacy includes her participation in ecofeminist art exhibitions, including her absolutely stunning land art installation last summer at the Verdancy Project in Oregon. Her passionate centering of beauty and connection as North Stars for inspiring positive change has personally shifted my own thinking away from climate despair many times. It's such an honor to be able to share Brooke's unique gift of perspective with all of you on the podcast as we talk today about creativity as a force for healing. Welcome, Brooke. I will start with the big question. What does creativity embody for you?
Oh, I love all this already. Thank you, Sarah. I've been feeling creativity, what it means to me is actually evolving the more I actually engage in it. So I would say when I was beginning this journey, I was in a group of artists all meeting about climate. And I would often say they're artists and I'm a psychologist. And in the several years of being in that group, I had a lot of chances to start to participate in art projects. And I would still think of myself as a psychologist doing art. And then the more I did, I realized, no, I'm just a creative person. And that creativity is sort of just a life energy that we can participate in. I love the water, and it starts to feel more like a river that I'm getting in, and that you can jump in, you can swim, you can play, you can move the rocks. So it's it's an evolving relationship that now I feel more identified with, and it feels more universally accessible than it ever did before.
Yes, creativity is a river that's always accessible to tap into that current.
It is so true, a powerful current. And I love what you said about the identity shift because creativity, and we've spoken about this before in other episodes, it belongs to everyone. It's not a product that sits on a shelf that some people have access to. It's a unique part of all of our beings, and our creativity is unique to all of us. And so it always lightens my heart when I hear someone identify as a creative because we all are, we just have our own way of expressing that.
That's right. It makes me, it's interesting because that shows up in therapy world, but I'm just trying to make those connections too. That one of my favorite therapy theories is called internal family systems, and it pulls from wisdom that's been around. But one of the beautiful ways that this theory articulates it is that we have this deep self. It's our witness self that's like the most loving, the most courageous, the most centered, and that we don't live in that self all the time because like life is hard. And one thing it says is there's portals back to that self, and one is compassion, one is curiosity, one is connectedness, and one is creativity. And I love the idea like we can't be denied those portals because they're actually like our way back to our like maybe deepest, most original self. So it makes sense to move away from just like, do I make a product to like, is this like part of my humanness?
Yes, and it 100% it is. I love that. And I'd love to hear more on your perspective of joy and its connection with creativity.
Mm. I've been thinking about this a lot because there is truly, I think, a lot of trouble in the world. And I don't know if we've ever had so much access to the trouble. So both feel true. It does feel like there's a lot of darkness and a lot of pain. And if you own a phone or you ever look at screens, there's sort of a constant inundation with that. And I've been meditating on what does it mean to not be glib or not be escapist, but to keep our life force alive and to keep our life force. That feels actually more like stewardship or a way of being a responsible human is to stay responsive. And so, for me at least, and it may be different for different people, having creativity as an energy feels really vital because it means things are possible. So, if I'm creative, then I can think of a new idea or see something in a new way or collaborate with something different or find new kinships to be part of or find new identities. And that possibility energy feels really joyful to me.
Yes.
And then it just is honestly just straight up fun to be creative too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a really powerful point in that with the handheld boxes of doom that are transmitting to us every single bad thing that's happening in the world, like in real time, we're receiving all of that, but we're not actually generating any outward flow unless we are creating. There's such a powerful reverse force to the creating, because we have that agency to make something happen that's positive. And so often when people don't put creativity in the forefront in their lives, they just get stuck in this loop of being plugged into all the bad news. So it's particularly fascinating to think about creativity from a mental health perspective, and that it can help root us in that sense of possibility and a portal to both things that are familiar, but potentially also good future possibilities too, into the unknown.
I love that idea. You just touching on agency too. I think about last summer when got to this land art project with my friend Shannon, the Verdancy project. I was nervous. Like I'm like immediately the thoughts of like, oh my gosh, I've never done this, and these professional artists are doing. I mean, all that kind of thinky self-doubt stuff. And then when I actually just started physically doing it, I had a couple of dear friends who were, I include Sarah in that, who were like, what if you just like started? And I started gathering the materials and just started setting aside time to get the flowers together and the moth, and there's some gluing elements. And there was a point when I was gluing, it was so meditative and it was so tactile and so soothing. And I felt I was probably in a meditative state, but it was just sort of, what happens when you're creating. And it was all those worries went away. And I thought, oh, this is satisfying in and of itself. Like it stopped mattering what other people were going to think in a very tangible way. It was like, oh, I'm just enjoying this. I'm just having fun and I'm in my sensory, sensual state. And then I look back at last summer, and that creating was probably one of my greatest sources of hope and joy and play that only creating could touch.
And I remember back last summer, when leading up to that and the conversations that we were having, and the sense of the identities that our culture puts on us, like, oh, are you in this box? Are you in that box? And a lot of people, this is something Larissa and I have spoken about before on the podcast, they don't think of themselves as artists because that's become such a narrowly defined box in our current culture. But art's for everyone. Everyone can be an artist. And I love the day when you came back from being there in the forest all day doing the installation, and you were just so full of joy, and you had created this beautiful, beautiful piece, and suddenly you found your artist identity in the doing of it.
Yeah. It was so physical. I don't think anyone could have explained that to me. People had said that, but it's back to me with that river feeling. You just know what a river feels like once you're in it. You got to get in.
You have got to get in, and creativity is a practice, and it's not necessarily the process of creating a product as we touched on earlier. It's much more expanded than that. Can you speak to that?
Oh, that's a fun question, Marissa. Yeah. I think a few of the words I've touched on, and then a few other thoughts. I think for me, when I move away from creativity as producing a product to a state of being, then it starts to feel like the possibility, like, oh, what if things were possible through creating that weren't possible before? Maybe I'm part of, again, the living energy of the universe wants to make something new, and it might be through me. That's like, feels really, really possible and really playful too. And I've been thinking about, in some ways, I'm having the experience of having like a new experience in my adult life, but it does feel, and I think it's true for a lot of people, I do feel more connected to my youngest self. As a child, I loved making things. I loved to write, and I loved to put beautiful things together. And I felt a lot of the creativity of the living world. So there's also a sense of being returned to an original self, and also how much fun it is to take yourself less seriously and to goof around.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
I love thinking about creating as the verb state. We are we are creating, and it's not about a creation. Like, that is completely secondary to what the verb state of the transformation that it puts us in. That's the point. It's returning us to our body. And like you were saying, the act of actually putting your installation on site, that was the moment it all came together for you through that tangible bodily movement. So I think that especially in the art world's focus on the product and how much the product costs and all those things, we forget some of the most precious parts of the process. And they're way at the beginning of that process.
Yeah, we forget them. And also, we feel like we come across this a lot in just so many different conversations in different contexts. It's like somebody took the permission away. And it's hard to put your finger on when that happened, because as kids, we're all given paint and crayons, and every kid is an artist, right? And then somewhere along the way, there were certain things that came into play that made you believe that it wasn't for you, you weren't good enough, you don't deserve, it's frivolous, you should be doing something more serious. And so this idea of giving yourself permission, is this something that you come across in your work in terms of people feeling like it's not for them?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think my mind goes two directions, Larissa, which is I think there's wounds, right? We know people get wounded around creativity, right? Something goes awry, you get blocked. That feels like maybe the standout way that it happens. But I wonder, and I feel this in my experience. For me, it was getting just so absorbed in other places. I treasure doing therapy, and actually, in some ways, therapy is deeply creative. You don't know what's going to happen. You're meeting another human being in a profound moment, and there's something very collaborative and emergent that actually is very creative. But there is such a responding to another quality to it. And I think one thing I've found is leaving this creative space in my life is that it's also healing to just express your own signature, and that signature does help other people feel seen and known in their signature. And I've always felt that way as an art appreciator, honestly. I mean, I treasure so many artists. I love creative books and creative people. So I guess in that sense, I've always received that. But it's interesting thinking about feeling like you're giving a gift to the world when you express your sort of vulnerable self. In some ways, your vulnerable expression, and that is a gift to people. So that's maybe a way that's coming back alive to me, is remembering that self-expression also gives to the community.
Yes.
What a great perspective.
And it so also then amplifies giving each person in that community the permission to explore their own self-expression. It gives them the seed of that confidence. And this is something we talk about a lot, about creativity in other cultures in the context of ceremony and ritual. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because that is very much the giving of permission when things are bounded by ceremony and ritual.
Yeah, that's right. I've been so, I mean, I've mentioned this climate artist group, and one thing I value in that group is we spend a lot of time with both Indigenous writers and Black feminists and Afrofuturism. I mean, that's just, all those are such incredibly rich literatures. And I think been so impacted by people who have really lived through the oppression of so much of what's happening in the world, also have this unique vision about what's going wrong and what could go better. And both returning to ancient ritual and building rituals now, we've learned a lot about, like, what's it mean to live on the wheel of the year, what's it mean to really honor people who steward this land for thousands of years and stewarded really well. So I think having that backdrop in that climate art group has felt like another prompt of, there have been groups and people who have held a lot of creative and loving space in their culture. Like, oh, wow, how amazing would that be to both honor those people and repair with them and learn to, like, what would it be like to build like more collective cultures around supporting each other in play and possibility and relationship to the earth. And I guess, at least at this point, these little pods I'm in, of like, it does make a difference to have little collectives. There is something that builds when you build ritual and ceremony and containers together that feels just a lot more vitalizing than doing it alone, for sure. I'll give one example. I know this is what's popping into my mind for some reason, but one of the artists in the group that I'm in, named Virginia Fleck, she makes these gorgeous pieces with recycled can taps. So she collects like thousands of them and then makes pieces that look like chandeliers, just hanging down, gorgeous. She does soundscapes with them. I would have never thought of this in a million years. It's so powerful to see. And when you see, you're like, how did she think of that? How did she do that? But that somehow there is ceremony even in just seeing her art, and like, what's she going to make next and what's she going to come up with, and she's using something that could have been
Yeah.
waste that goes into landfills, and then now she's making it beautiful. So it's like another example, like, oh, bouncing off of this person making their beauty makes life feel more ceremonial, for sure.
Yes. Yeah. And then how we cross-pollinate as creative people too, because you're interacting with her art and seeing her art journey. I'm sure in some way that is then seeding into the creations you're making. And so it feels really vulnerable to share our art sometimes. Well, sometimes, most of the time, but it's really neat to remember that it's creating this good that is beyond us.
It takes courage, but then you might give people courage too.
Yes. Yeah.
100%. And like you said before, it's like by me doing this, you see, oh, well, she's doing it. I could do it too. It's that vulnerable share where people feel like they don't have to be a professional to even engage in this process. Yes, there are other professionals like the ones you mentioned, and their role is different because they're 100% focused on that. And the outcome is a product or a installation or a collaboration. But for all of us who maybe don't make full time, it can definitely be a way of thinking and engaging with our most authentic selves.
There are unique challenges that come with having your artistic joy also be the thing that has to pay your bills. Instead of people who may not necessarily pay their bills by their creativity thinking, oh, well, I'm not a professional artist because I'm not paying my bills with that. Think about how liberated you are by not having to pay your bills with that.
Like, it feels really important to protect play space.
Yes, yes. And it's part of that remembering who we always were. It's something that comes up in conversations a lot with people who are engaging in their creativity is eventually they'll say, I did this when I was a kid, or this is exactly what I loved doing when I was a child. And it's really heartening to see how those things never really leave us. They can be latent for years and years, but they are there waiting to be uncovered again.
It's no wonder that for a lot of people, to connect your childhood self, it's to be artistic and to be in nature. And if there's something about the tactileness of earth, at least for me, that feels like so evocative and nourishing. I was thinking about like our roses are just starting to bloom here in Portland, and they're just so silky and they're just so fragrant. And our lilacs are out, and it's still raining a good bit here. The gushy, squishy mud is really the soundscape of that. And there's something I'm just noticing, like spending time with the tactile earth also feels, it connects me to my younger self. And it also feels like, well, why wouldn't I be creative? Like the earth is so creative. Earth's always like messing around and making all this beauty.
A
Yeah.
continually changing exhibition. You know, the colors are a little bit different every day.
A shifting exhibit. Yeah.
The perfect one. And in that tactile muddiness, so I was a ceramics major at art school. And so I relate very much to that physical, earthy, tactile connection and the way that, you give any person a lump of clay and everybody just has this innate wiring to form something out of it, whatever it might be. And going back in time when it was to create tools or baskets or whatever it was, there was a practical reason. And we don't have that practical reason anymore. But still, if you give someone a lump of clay, they will start to form something.
Yeah. And whatever they form is going to be really satisfying for them. It's a missing piece in our 21st century life when people say, oh, I'm not creative, and they never allow themselves to engage in that sphere. We've talked a lot about art making as creativity, but like I know you're a poet, Brooke. There are a lot of other forms of creativity. So I want to just touch on the expansiveness of that for a minute because someone can be creative in their garden. They can be creative as a writer. They can be creative in how they put fabric together in their home. There are so very many ways to engage in creativity beyond oil paints and an easel.
Yeah, that goes back to creativity as a way of being, which feels really fun. If I think of it as a way of being, it feels, back to Larissa's word of permission, it feels like permission to not do things the way we've been told or expected, I guess. And
Yeah.
that feels really liberating. Like, why do we do it that way? Do we have to do it that way? Why can we do a different way?
What if?
Yeah.
Yes, and allowing ourselves to take satisfaction in appreciating beauty and making beauty in whatever beauty means for us, because it's going to be unique for everyone.
And then there's the aspect of creativity that is the connecting piece. Maybe let's talk about that a little bit in terms of creative, like co-creation, and what that brings to society in terms of the sense of play, but the healing and the joy, and the 1 + 1 = not two, more, whatever the saying is.
Well, I'm feeling it right now. I gotta say it right in real time. I feel it with the two of you. There's this sense of, even in this conversation, like, oh, it's so fun. It's fun to be in touch with our originality and sort of the purity of our own space, but it's really fun to mix paint. I think about that when you're co-creating or you're co-playing, you're co-exploring, you're really creating a space to be your genuine selves together that feels so joyful, so peaceful, and so I feel so good to be welcomed in that state by another person, I think.
Yes. Yes, there's that receiving and reflecting, and also the joy of bouncing creativity off each other. And I say this for both of you, because you two are some of my favorite creative collaborators, is that it's being able to throw an idea out and have it be caught and like, isn't that cool? And then here's something back. That's the exponential element of it, the magic of it, where it's not just 1 + 1 = 2 anymore. It's suddenly been enlivened by the alchemy of the creative minds together.
Yeah, I have a 9-year-old right now, and over the years watching her play, it was so fascinating to me to see how a little world could be created by one kid saying, well, what if this? And what if you're that? And what if this? And then they act out and play that scenario. And it can be anything, and anything's possible. And then I was thinking, oh no, I'll just watch. I've got busy things to do. I've got grown up things to do. And then reflecting on that and going, how sad is that? That one of the most joyous things, because I remember that being so fun as a kid, I'm now rejecting. So, what is the adult version of that I can now bring back? What is that play where it can be unbounded and carefree and anything is possible? Because there is so much magic and potency and possibility in healing, in creating, in reimagining the worlds that we live in.
Yes.
I love the example with kids because I've noticed often as an adult, I feels like you almost have to transition into kid mode. It's so easy to be like too serious with kids, like, "What do you do in school today?" And they're like, "Why are you asking me that?" You know. But but exactly what you said, Larissa, if you can, like, I've got these darling nieces, and I love playing with them, and if they love to direct the play, so they'll be like, "Okay, just like you're going to be this, and you're going to be that," and if you enter into the world they created, they are just so delighted. It's so fun to be the director, like calling you into this play. It kind of makes me think of when you watch people improvise like jam bands or like jazz bands, where like someone plays like a little riff and the person's like, oh, they pick up the riff and they take it away on their instrument. It's so fun to watch people sort of trust each other and hand that energy over and then hand it back. And
Yes, and there's that trust and safety, and then that mutual kind of holding of each other. And that's part of what makes it so potent, because I mean, it's scary to be creative. It's always scary to be creative, and it's particularly scary to be creative on your own. And so there's this just special magic in being creative together where you're holding each other and the sum of it all. Brooke, thank you so much for coming on today. We loved hearing your thoughts. Is there anything you want to leave us with?
well, first, I'll just say again, this was so delightful to play with the two of you. I felt all that creative, juicy, squishy mud ceramic energy flowing through our time. And I guess what's sticking with me as we just come to this close is I want so much for more people to get to live in this delight and to live in this play. And I imagine anyone drawn to this podcast is already thinking about and nurturing that. But I just want to add my voice to it. Might be risky, it might be uncertain, but it does lead you to new, alive, and joyful places. So just speaking from the trail. And then the thing that's the other little thread that's just felt really sweet throughout this conversation is the way that the earth wants to hold our joy and our courage and our play. And so maybe I'll just share a couple quotes from one of my favorite gardeners about how being with the earth is also creative. This is from Monty Don, who I just adore, who does the Gardener's World on BBC. Oh, my heart. He says, I think gardening is about the future, a slow thing that is deep and spiritual as well as spiritually rewarding. The first snowdrop, the flowering of the rose you pruned, a lettuce you grew from seed, the robin singing just for you. These are small things, but all positive, all healing. Then there was one more I was just thinking of. Oh, it's Monty Don again. Monty Don theme. Gardening is a creative act, a way to express oneself and connect with the natural world. The more you observe and interact with your garden, the more attuned you become to its needs and rhythms. And then that goes so well with Robin Wall Kimmerer, which lots of people know this one. But when you feel that the earth loves you in return, that love you have transforms the relationship from a one-way street into a sacred bond. That's why I made my daughters learn to garden, so they would always have a mother to love them.
I think that's really cool. Monty Don is a jewelry designer.
And it was kind of a mental health journey for him, I think, too.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Brooke.
Thank you so much for joining us today on the Art Elevator podcast. We hope that this episode has inspired you to slow down and take just a moment in your day to tap into something creative you love doing.